Welcome back to the Multifamily Mind podcast. Today we sat down with Alycia Anderson, a TEDx speaker and a multifamily aficionado. In this episode, we will cover Alycia's experience with intersectionality as a disabled woman, her advice for women looking to grow their careers in multifamily, disabling ableism and moving beyond compliance, and who Alycia believes to be the most audacious woman in multifamily. As always, this podcast is superpowered by Sales Mail. Let's dive right in. All right, well, hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of the Multifamily Mind. I'm your host, Steve Wunsch, excited to bring you this special limited edition podcast episode that is all geared around Women's History Month. And the theme of Women's History Month for 2025 is Moving Forward Together, Women Educating and Inspiring Generations. This theme highlights the significant contributions of women who have dedicated their lives to educating and mentoring others, shaping the future generations, and the power of women working together to achieve progress and equality. And there's nobody in my circle that I think is a better ambassador of this principle or these ideas than my dear friend Alycia Anderson. Alycia, welcome back. We're so happy to have you join us again. How have you been, my dear?
I've been so good. Happy New Year. And I'm so excited to have an invite back. Thank you.
Yeah, you're a first be back. That's a pretty big honor in my book.
Oh, I like it.
So you had a really busy year last year. Can you give us just like a 40,000 foot view of where you were and what you did last year?
You know, I was all over literally the world speaking on global stages, had a ton of opportunity to make some impact. I had the opportunity to do New York Fashion Week. I rolled in a runway. I won awards. I did all kinds of incredible things. But to your point about inspiring the next generation, I did a lot of work last year too in housing and in education and in insurance, and made some real impact with youth and hopefully giving them the mentorship to be bold in their own space and advocacy to reach their dreams too. So last year was incredible. It was almost so much that I stopped at the end of the year and had to celebrate a few things that I kind of just kept going. But nothing but gratitude for the opportunities that have been in front of me and hopefully will continue to be this year.
I love it. Your platform is amazing. You've got a few different things that you really want to talk about, from everything from disabling ableism to, a path forward for inclusivity. You're making history. I don't think there's a voice like yours. I know for sure in the multifamily space, there is no voice but yours who is bringing these messages around, disability, disabling ableism, creating that opportunity, not only for employment, but for just regular life itself than you. And so I was wondering if you can kind of tell us, what motivates you to do what you do, and what kind of legacy do you hope to leave as a result of all this great work that you've been doing?
I hope to leave the legacy of the heart of inclusion. I hope to create space and some essence in the world that's going to leave a lasting, impactful, empowered path for everyone to not be afraid to try to reach their most ultimate dreams. And in that, teach along the way the importance of creating accessible spaces so everyone can have an at-bat at that without being limited by environments or technologies or things that might not have been thoughtful from an accessibility standpoint. So hopefully just creating some meaningful change to create space for others. So maybe it's not quite as hard for the next generation to follow.
Yeah, I love it. In our pre conversations, you talked a little bit about, kind of your story where you had to really embrace your power as a woman. You had to embrace your power as a person with a disability. looking at things through a different lens. And one of the words that you use a lot, which I love, is this word intersectionality. And I was wondering if you could elaborate for our listeners, what does that really mean and why is it so important to address that intersectionality?
I love that you're bringing up this word during this month, during Women's History Month, because intersectionality is all about understanding the intersection of each person's identity. And for me, my disability oftentimes literally takes over my identity because it's the thing that is most apparent. Right. And sometimes I want my womanhood to be at the forefront of my identity. And a couple years ago, I was hired at Abercrombie & Fitch to create a speech that was called Intersectionality Through the Lens of Disability that talks about just this. Like, intersectionality is a term that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and it's a theory that really focuses on the intersections of our identity. And she's famous for quoting once that if you see inequality as a them problem or as an other unfortunate problem, that is the problem. I hope I got that quote right. And it's a framework that really looks at our identity, not only from a physical standpoint, but our lived experiences and how it creates opportunity, but also lack thereof, and how that impacts somebody's life as they're moving through it, as they're creating education opportunities, as they're moving into the workforce. And it's a framework that really looks at ableism and racism and sexism and all of the other isms and how they intersect to impact somebody's life, whether it's in a positive way or in an oppressive way, depending on the given situation. So it's really, I think it's a powerful theory for us to know and recognize, not only so we can understand our own paths in life, but others as well, whether they're on our team or they're our residents or they're our family members or whatever. So if you don't know what intersectionality is, I would take a little time and read about it because it's really powerful theory.
And how did it empower you to, create your platform, and how has it given you a voice that you might not have had otherwise?
One of the things I fought for the most is being a woman, like being recognized as a woman in leadership that has a lot of value, which is something that a lot of us women in the workplace are constantly kind of fighting for and chasing for our space. And it goes back to, like, oftentimes we look at disability as that is the identity, like I just said. And being a woman is one of the most incredible pieces of my identity that I've literally had to shout from the rooftops, this is part of who I am. I want to be looked at as a woman, as feminine, as powerful, as important as the other layers of my identity. And oftentimes disability is not filed in the file cabinet like that. And so for me, the more I've leaned into that, the more it's empowered my path to create content that is very centered around not only my disability, but the struggles that women in the workplace go through as well. And the intersection of that, there's privilege and there's oppression, right? I'm a white woman, there's privilege there. I'm a disabled woman, there's oppression there. And so recognizing how those two things intertwine and affect specifically the workplace is, once I realized that was going on, I could take actionable steps. I could recognize when maybe I needed to advocate for myself a little bit louder, or maybe I needed to advocate for somebody else on my team, or recognize that there's some inconsistencies going on because of some of these things, and maybe be part of the solution in an active role. So
I love it. And I think that's really the key is that opportunity to give a voice to those that would otherwise not have that, to advocate for someone, and to me that word advocate advocate as a descriptor of a person. That kind of is you in an embodiment of you, because you advocate for so many different, not just for disabled folks, but just for folks that are marginalized, regardless of what it is that they're being marginalized on or because of. You really are that strong voice. I love that. And I'm so glad that we have the opportunity to have your voice for this time here. Since we're here for Women's History Month, let's kind of focus a bit on women in multifamily specifically, because that's our audience. What kind of advice would you give a woman in multifamily, whether they're at the corporate level providing support as maybe a marketing director or a training director, or maybe even someone who's in a C-suite, because there seems to be a few more women in those key leadership roles at some of the companies that we both have done work with before. What advice would you give them to grow their career in multifamily? And let's start there.
My career in multifamily was on the vendor side of the business, so I navigated different software companies while I grew my career. And I think the number one advice that I would give women in any role in multifamily or beyond is to lean into your value and articulate it, because I waited for a very long time in my career to get the raise, to move up in positions, because I felt like I knew I deserved it, but I was always afraid to advocate for a raise or advocate to try a new position or move into leadership. And that was such a blocker in my career, like 10 years of it, like 10 years of 8 years of not progressing fast enough, because I was afraid, I was afraid to lean into and have a call plan, an action, to sit in front of my boss and say, this is what I've done, this is what I've created, this is where I want to go, and this is what I need. And I think a lot of us as women do that in our careers. We want to be polite, we want to wait, we know that these different positions we deserve, and they're going to come to us because we deserve it. And the reality is, to your word of advocacy, if we're not using our voices to advocate our value, we remain stagnant for much too long. And, this 40% of women that are employed in multifamily-ish, 9% are only in like leadership, C-suite, boardroom level positions. We need to use our voices louder to have those seats, to give the representation of women, to disabled women in those roles, so we understand where we can help grow some of the initiatives that need attention. Like in my case, it would be accessibility and inclusion and those types of things. So the number one advice that I give is don't wait. Like when you know it's time to progress in your career, make a call plan, know exactly how you're going to position yourself, so you don't go in without a plan. Like that was like sales 101 for me when I was going through all of my different career positions. But having that plan and getting in front of your boss and asking for the things that you need, most of the time you're going to get it and you're going to move and advance. And I think it's really important.
It's so funny because all the while you were talking, I kept thinking about the term value proposition, and as a salesperson, if you can't articulate your value proposition, you're never going to hit a chord with a potential customer, regardless of the solution that you're offering, whether it's a good fit or not. Because if you can't put into word, here's how I'm going to bring value to your organization in these specific ways, and for a woman to be able to really articulate her own value proposition, I think is something that a lot of people don't really think about. So that's a really great word of advice. How did you switch your mindset then from, being afraid to go there to a standpoint of I deserve to go there? What was it that kind of flipped that switch for you? Was there an incident that happened, or was there an example of someone that you followed?
Yeah, I think it was just experience and getting to know myself more and more and trusting who I am and finding strength in that, which took me way too long in my career. Honestly, it took me way too long. And my success, like I, again, was like on this sales career where I, goal was to watch the lines go up and sell software and and achieve. And I was a top performer, and I wasn't in the positions that I felt like I deserved to be in. And at some point, you kind of just get like, it's time to speak up and advocate. And so that is what I did. For me, it took me moving, I moved a position, I moved companies. And sometimes that's what it takes too, to make significant, promotional strides. Thank you. Sometimes you have to switch companies. And that took me from, a middle role to executive to VP, and then I was uncomfortable actually in that position at first, oh wow, I've got a VP role. Do I deserve this? That's how I felt first. Do I deserve it? And then absolutely I deserve this. I earned this, and so I just think it took some time for me to just have a relationship with my own power, honestly.
That's an interesting concept, a relationship with your own power.
And I think leadership wants to see that from you as well, to be assertive. Are you going to be assertive and literally ask for the things that you deserve, or are you going to be passive? And I think that assertion is an important quality to share, especially when you're moving up the ladder and you're trying to get into leadership. So, it was just time.
Yeah.
Overtime.
And then way overdue. Well, and then you made this transition to becoming a business owner and working for yourself. And I know that, there were probably a few sleepless nights, probably a few times where, you were fearful of taking that step. But I mean, look what you've done we were joking before we came on the air about your 4-page Christmas letter of all the things that you and Marty accomplished in 2024. And I'm just blown away that at one point, I remember you'd be like, I don't know if I can do this or not. And now look at you. I mean, your platform is strong. Your voice is strong. Your podcast, for those of you that don't know, Alycia has a podcast called Pushing Forward with Alycia Anderson. And she talks to all kinds of people. Yeah, you bet. She talks to all kinds of people, not just those with disabilities, but those who are allies and those who are advocating for some of the causes that she supports. And I love to see how far you've come. And I think your story, especially, wrapped in this beautiful cloak of Women's History Month, is just such a great thing to share with our audience. Hi, folks. I wanted to take a quick 30-second break so that I could say, I hope you're enjoying today's episode, which couldn't be brought to you without being superpowered by Sales Mail. I mean, really, we couldn't produce this content without them. Sales Mail is the easiest and best tool for sending personalized video via email, text, and CRM. So, if you really are enjoying today's episode, it would mean a lot to me if you would visit salesmail.com so you can check out how our solutions might impact your business communications. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn as well. Okay, that's enough. Now back to the conversation. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit with us about your platform. You've got the Heart of Inclusion is one of your keynotes, and I know you speak a lot about disabling ableism. And I was wondering if you could, sort of share with us a little bit of your perspective on, especially in the multifamily space. Where do you see ableism happening in multifamily, and how can we help operators to identify that it's there and then to challenge it?
Ableism is a discrimination or prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. And ableism is something that we are taught from a very young age. It is the lessons that we learn when we're being shushed, when we're curious, when we're young. If we see somebody with a disability, don't ask, because we're afraid that we're going to say the wrong thing. And so parents, and most of the time there's no ill will here, but it's right. The shushing and the don't ask, don't look methodology of looking at disability like it's a bad thing, like we can't discuss it. And that trickles into employment as we grow up. Like we're those little kids, our mom's like, don't ask, look away. And, then we become the hiring manager and we're like, don't ask, look away, don't have the conversation. They're the biases that we carry around that we don't even realize our whole life. And from a multifamily perspective, ableism is lack of accessibility. It's lack of policies that can accommodate different types of disabilities. It's lack of having technologies in your leasing office that would accommodate somebody who's visually impaired or has a hearing impairment, or, lack of employment opportunities because our biases are saying that girl in the wheelchair can't do this job. I'm not even going to consider it. So it's disabling ableism is a play on words. And I wrote that in a TEDx speech when I was in multifamily still in tech. And it's a play on words, disable meaning technology, unplug, disconnect, flip the switch off of our biases towards disability so we can have a modern pathway to inclusion, a modern way of thinking about disability. That the disability isn't the problem, it's the world that is built around us not taking into consideration the over 1 billion people that are disabled in our world. And so it trickles in everywhere. It trickles in employment and accessibility and development and technology and the lack thereof flexibility in creating accessibility through all of those tools.
Yeah,
it's everywhere.
I think a lot of people, unfortunately, I think a lot of people, I have a conversation oftentimes with folks about being compliant versus being committed, right? Mm-hmm. And so like, oh yeah, every property that's been built since March of 1991 has a certain number of units that are set aside, and they're designed for, ADA compliance and all of that good stuff. But how do we as operators in the multifamily space kind of move beyond this idea of compliance to a place where we're a bit more committed? And what are maybe some recommendations that you could make? Maybe not necessarily like, huge construction costs or big initiatives, but what are some small things that the folks listening could easily start to implement in their organizations to begin to kind of move out of this box of I'm compliant, I've checked the box, we've got, 6 apartments here that are set aside, there's more to it than that. So what are some recommendations that you make to the groups listening to just start to move beyond compliance?
Yeah. Compliance is so important. We all know that in this industry. And I like what you said about being committed, not just having the check off the box, but what's our commitment to compliance and going beyond that, looking universally at our products, at our hiring practices, at our leasing offices, and how do we create space that is more inviting to the disabled consumer, to the disabled employee, to the disabled human being. And there's lots of easy little takeaways. I think first and foremost, hire people with disabilities. We are not doing a good enough job in multifamily and literally just hiring people with disabilities and leveraging their talents as expertise in a field that has so much opportunity to innovate. And so I think number one, hire somebody with a disability that you need to have the conversation with them about how do we accommodate? How are you, the girl in the wheelchair, going to do this job? And don't be afraid to start to open up conversations about things that we are afraid of. Looking at spaces like a leasing office or something like that. Okay, we've got the check off the box compliance, accessibility, but what are things that we can do universally? Always have there to be more accommodating, to share with the disabled community, whether they're the resident or they're the employee, that they're invited in. Make your PDFs accessible. Make sure that every door is a couple inches wider. Like, make sure there's one barrier-free entrance somewhere. There's little things that you can do universally that might not be the ADA check off the box, but work for a more diverse ability level. And those little nuances are going to invite people in to purchase from you, to be employed within your community or your company. Add representation on your websites and accessibility on your websites. Use that as an opportunity, a nonverbal opportunity. Like, we've got accessibility tools on our website. You're invited in. We care about you, the consumer, the disabled consumer. We want you to be a part of our community or our product or our offerings. And so there's nuances, little things that you can politely add in that makes the disabled consumer go, oh my gosh, I see myself here on their website. That I'm welcome. I'm going to go rent an apartment from this building, and companies are really starting to leverage those things today. And once you do something like that, that consumer, that disabled consumer, that over 1 billion people globally are going to come back over and over and over and over again, because guess what? 90% of companies aren't even taking the time to make these little tiny tweaks that are honestly minor, but they really make a huge impact.
I love that. That's really practical and such an easy thing to do. So representation is important, and accessibility. Those are two easy things for any operator to do in their marketing strategy with their websites. Representation is important to folks. And I think since I've known you, I have a little bit more my radar sweeps for those types of things. And I've even seen more representation in commercials on television, and even people in movies and musicals. You've got a friend who was Little Ado Annie in Oklahoma, who's a wheelchair user. And, so I've seen more of it. I just think multifamily hasn't really taken a minute to sit back and say, how can we easily bring to the table over 1 billion potential customers that we're not inviting to the table before this point?
Another thing I think is really important too, and maybe top of mind important, is we need to educate. We need to have trainings on this, not just from a compliance standpoint, but like conversational. How do we engage with one another? And those things need to be, to your point, ongoing. Like, this is not a topic that we learn once and it goes away, because our world is moving so fast. Things are constantly changing. And from an education standpoint, we are not talking enough about how to navigate not just the building or the infrastructure, but our own mindsets and the things that how do we disable ableism, So employees can start to feel comfortable in their space to navigate something that we have taught through forever in multifamily, that this is scary. We need to avoid. This is compliance. This is dollars. This is difficult for us. Instead of Alycia rolling into your leasing office and, the team going, yes, oh my gosh, we're going to close a deal. We have a new customer. We want her no matter what, and that's a different experience.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I was thinking while we've been having this conversation just around, how easy it is for, like an operator as they're building a community to think about all the ways that they can generate ancillary income by putting in electronic car chargers, by, all these different features and amenities that we think will really speak to the demographic that would live at such a property. And I bet you 100% we're not having a conversation around how could we also build this community around someone with a disability to make it a really great living experience.
I am so happy you brought that up. When I was selling software, I used to want to go work for one of the fitness companies because, to your point, ancillary services and amenities like oftentimes are not taking into consideration accessibility. And for instance, accessible equipment, like to be able to go work out. Why can't we have one hand cycle in every single gym that is available? You know, there's little things that you can do that make a massive difference. Like if I was shopping for apartments and there was 10 buildings that I was looking at, communities, and there was a hand cycle in one of them, I would absolutely buy from that one, hands down, done. Like was never able to use any of those amenities, and it was frustrating for me as a consumer, honestly. So little things like that.
Yeah. Just the little things, and what a big difference that would make, huh?
Huge.
So, Alycia, those are some really great, really easy, actionable things that our listeners can implement into their current process. So, thanks so much for sharing that. You know, one of the things that helps, when folks aren't quite sure what to do or what direction to take things, having a consultant or somebody who's got a really good perspective on your kind of work would be a real benefit to have a partner like that. So can you share with our listeners just a little bit about what your company does and how they might be able to leverage you?
Yes, please. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, hiring outside consultants is another great idea, and that's what I do with my work. I've got a whole offering of keynote speeches, trainings, workshops, facilitations that are focused on training teams about disability inclusion. Also, an Embracing Disability Inclusion leadership workshop, which has been a fan favorite in the last year. So I also do a lot of accessibility beyond compliance consulting and adaptive product consulting. So please reach out to me if you're trying to navigate any of these conversations. I love when I get to work in multifamily and bring my past multifamily experience together with the current work that I'm doing. So definitely reach out to me at AlyciaAnderson.com.
That's great. And we'll make sure in the show notes that everybody knows how to get a hold of you. And if you haven't yet, you can find her podcast on YouTube. It's called Pushing Forward with Alycia Anderson. I highly recommend you give it a listen. Her TEDx talk as well. You can follow her at Alycia Speaks is her @ sign for YouTube, and her TEDx talk is there as well. That's that was kind of what kicked things off, isn't it?
And I'm booking now for July for Disability Pride Month, so call me.
Okay, good deal. Thank you. I do want to bring us kind of to a close for this this edition of the Multifamily Mind, but I have a question, Alycia, that I want to ask you. You inspire so many people. You've been such an inspiration for me, and I know as you've given your message across the country, you've inspired thousands of people to look at things through a different lens and to not be afraid to have important conversations that matter to people. And I'm curious to know, who inspires you, especially since this edition of Multifamily Mind is specific to Women's History Month. Who is the most audacious woman that you respect, admire, and kind of look after in a multifamily role?
There's so many amazing women, number one, in multifamily that have been allies for me to grow my career and support me. So this was a tough one for me to think about, but I'm going to say Stephanie Anderson from Grace Hill, and I choose her because number one, she's daring and brave and bold in putting out messaging constantly to help educate our industry. But she's also been a really consistent, to your point, partner and collaborator with my movement specifically. We've partnered on several projects, and I just feel very seen and valued with her work and her partnerships that she's brought into my life, specifically in the last 4 years since I started my business. That continual drip of partnership, of collaboration on a specific topic moves the needle forward in the work. And she's definitely been one of those people that have done that. So I'm going to lift her up. Yeah.
I love that. And you know what else I know about her is she is authentically a woman in her posts. She'll start with no makeup on and she is not afraid to go there. And she shows it. She's got kids. I mean, she'll give you the full Monty if you want it. It's right there. And that authenticity, I think too, is one of the things that makes her such an outstanding ambassador, not only for Grace Hill, but just for women in multifamily in general.
Yeah, I agree.
Love it.
She's
Love it. She is. Well, so are you, my dear. And I really appreciate, I know how busy you are. And I appreciate that you've taken the time to sit with us and to share with us your perspectives. I hope our listening audience has taken a few nuggets away to start making some of those small, it's not like we're asking you to change the world tomorrow, but just to begin to make some of those little small changes, pay attention to some of those nuances, begin to start talking about things and begin to look at a new development that you're building through the eyes of someone who might be in need of some accommodations that aren't typical. So I appreciate your time. I love you. I love your work. Please tell Marty and Milo that I said hi, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Steve Wunsch and Alycia Anderson on the Multifamily Mind. We love you guys. Thanks. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Multifamily Mind podcast, brought to you by SalesMail, the easiest way to send personalized video via email, text, and CRM. To learn more, go to salesmail.com. And remember, always be audacious. Until next time, I'm Steve Wunsch. Have a great week.